Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, based on the time zones you all are coming from. So, guys, before we start with the session, can you all please give me a quick confirmation if you all can see my screen and hear me loud and clear as well? Perfect. Thank you so much for the confirmation, everyone. So, the main agenda for today's session here would be, guys, to discuss on the continuous delivery. What exactly is CI and CD and how they compare to each other? What is Jenkins? And again, we'll be looking at a small hands-on on how we can use Jenkins to start delivering any kind of project as a part of continuous integration and deployment, right? That will be our main motive of today's session here. So first of all, here let's revisit the concept of continuous integration, delivery, and deployment that we had covered in our initial session, right? So when we talk about continuous delivery, for example, here we can create entire pipeline that we discussed already, right? So in pipeline, for example, suppose if we want to fetch the code automatically that has been submitted by the team on Git, right? If we want to create a build out of it, right? And then we want to attach some multiple testing script on top of it, then we can do that easily as a part of continuous delivery. We can do that, right? To understand this again in simple layman terms here, for example, suppose if we have a code, suppose we have our GitHub, right? So again, if multiple team of developers, they are continuously committing the code to Git, right? So to their GitHub account here, right? So now what we can do, we can simply fetch the code. Our system can simply fetch the code from GitHub as soon as the same changes has been made, right? And then out of the code that has been fetched, a continuous build can be created, right? Using tools like we have Mavens, right? And once the entire build is also done, then again we can use scripts like we have seen in Selenium, right? That we'll be focusing on in our subsequent sessions. And then once the script has also been added, it can also be delivered to the different servers out here. Suppose if you want to deliver this to production servers or testing servers, we can do this, right? And again, the feedback from it can also be again passed on to the development team out there, right? So this entire process can be automated by using tools like we have a continuous integration and delivery tools here, like we have Jenkins, right? And that's exactly we use Jenkins because again, it can simply automate the entire process so that we don't have to focus on completing each and every step one by one manually, right? Because again, if we do that manually, then we are simply violating the entire concept of DevOps, being a part of continuity, right? And that exactly we mean by continuity and a pipeline here, right? So if we have to understand continuous delivery, then again, as soon as the code is being committed to the source code repository, just like we have a GitHub, right? Then that code can be pulled automatically by the build server, right? So again, then once the code is available, then we can use building tools like we have Mavens, we have Gradle, we have Apache, right? So these can be used to create a build out of it. Now, when we say building, we have seen this concept. When we say building, we mean the compilation, we mean the code review, we mean the unit testing, integration test, and packaging. These all are a part of continuous building, right? That we can do here. All right. And then once the entire build has been created, then we can perform multiple user acceptance tests on top of it. We can do that, right? And then once we now again, so entire setup here from the source code management plus creating a build out of it, plus deploying this to again, then performing user acceptance tests. These all are a part of continuous delivery here. These all are part of continuous delivery here. And the main difference between continuous integration, delivery, and deployment. Now, when we say continuous integration, it simply focuses on just having the code being available on GitHub and then pulling that code to create a build, right? So this is called continuous integration. So continuous integration is simply the combination of pulling the code from the Git repository and creating a build out of it. And then here now, and when we talk about continuous delivery, then it also includes the multiple user acceptance tests, whereas continuous deployment includes the production as well, right? So that exactly is the main difference between continuous integration, continuous delivery, and then we have continuous deployment out here, right? And again, now if we want to see this in a tabular format here, then again, continuous integration is simply used for automating the entire build for every commit, right? Continuous delivery also includes not only like creating the build and performing the user acceptance test as well, And continuous deployment includes automating the build, conducting the user acceptance test, and then sending that code to the production server for every commit out there. That's the main difference between continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment out here. Whenever we are creating a build, again, we obviously work on the remote repository, right? Not on the local repository, right? So that's the main difference here. Whenever we are talking about continuous integration, we simply pull the code that has been pushed by multiple developers from local to remote, right? And then once the code is available in remote, then we create a build out of it. Then we create a build out of it. Then we create a build out of it, right? And then once we have the code available in the build server, then what we do? We simply create a user acceptance test on top of it, right? And if we are performing user acceptance test, then that will be a part of the continuous delivery. And again, if we are also pushing this to production server, then that will be a part of continuous deployment. All right. And that is exactly what we have seen here. In continuous integration, we simply commit the code when we perform the unit and integration test, and then we can deploy it to the test environment, right? Whereas in the continuous delivery, we also take care of acceptance testing. Whereas in production, and when we are deploying this to production, we also take care of the that's what is being taken care of in continuous deployment here. Now let's try to answer this question here. Is continuous integration enough here? Basically, what we are doing in continuous integration, now here we are simply focusing on two things here: compilation and performing the unit testing as a part of automated build, right? Now let's understand this by a simple use case here. Suppose there are 80 developers working on a large project, and they all are using the continuous integration pipelines in order to facilitate the automated builds, right? Now, one day they decided to deploy the latest build that had passed the unit test into the test environment. However, the system did not seem to work. Logically, this should have worked because they had used the last system, the last build that was completely okay, that has passed the unit test here, but right? But still, the entire deployment did not work in the actual deployment server here, right? That means there was an issue. There was an issue here, right? And now let's carry forward. Now let's move ahead with the same topic that we have been discussing. Now the main reason for that failure was, again, one of the senior developers tried the application on their own development machine. Again, the code did not work there itself, right? The code did not work there as well. Again, then foreseeing the issue here, then again they stepped back and again through the earlier versions, and then they found the system had stopped working 3 weeks earlier, right? Now, as we know here, we can create the pipeline. Now, what is pipeline that we discussed in our earlier sessions, right? And then here in pipeline, here we can define the commit here. Suppose here we have in the pipeline number 86, there we had the commit where we have pulled the code from the remote repository. Then we did create the user acceptance test out of it, which failed, right? But in pipeline 85, the commit, acceptance, and user acceptance test and the production, these all things were delivered successfully, right? Whereas in pipeline, now that means the system started failing in the pipeline 86 itself, right? That means now in pipeline 86, the user acceptance test had failed, and whereas in pipeline number 88, that means there are two pipelines ahead of it. Again, the acceptance test will also failed completely, right? And that's why we have to take care of the continuous delivery. So to make sure that each and every thing is continuously delivered as well, right? So that any kind of drawback that is again a part of the entire code is tested properly as a part of continuous delivery itself. So as a part of the most popular CI/CD tools, here we have Jenkins, we have Buildboard, we have Travis, and then we have Bamboo from Audition, right? Where the most popular tool out there is Jenkins, that will be focusing on. And Jenkins is an open source tool that we can get started with, right? So what is Jenkins? So Jenkins is an open source tool that, again, open source automation tool written in Java that we can use to get started on top of continuous integration, right? Again, Jenkins also has the same architecture as master and slave architecture, where we'll be having one particular master and then we can have multiple slaves attached to it, right? So that the entire, whatever environment needs to be configured here, it can be passed on to the slave for the continuous integration itself. Jenkins are the most popular tools available out here. Why? Because Jenkins has support for more than 2,000 plugins, right? So Jenkins has a complete library of more than 2,000 plugins for different tools out there that can, and through them, it is much easier for any team using any kind of software to get on board using Jenkins, and then they can deploy their own projects accordingly, right? So that's why Jenkins is the most popular and most widely tool available as a part of the continuous integration phase in DevOps, right? And that's why we can see here we have multiple plugins. Now here we have for test cases, here we have for report generation, here we have for notification, right? Again, we can send multiple notifications using Jenkins, right? And then we have multiple deployments available. Here we can have compilation also being done using Mavens, right? So for each and every process here, for testing, for sending reports, for notification, for deployment, for compilation, right? So here we can use multiple plugins depending upon the category, but depending upon the use case that we are trying to achieve or run on top of Jenkins, right? So that's the main setup for Jenkins here. So first of all, here we have multiple developers. They all are committing their code to a source code repository, such as GitHub. And now Jenkins can simply pull the code from GitHub, and then it can simply send it to the testing and production server, right? And the feedback received from the testing done, they can be sent back to the development team as a part of completion of the entire cycle here. All right. And now let's understand why exactly we need to have the master slave architecture. That means we need to have multiple nodes running Jenkins, right? Let's understand why we need these multiple nodes here. The main drawback of Jenkins is, suppose, let's say we want to run one web test on top of Windows machine. We want to run another test on Linux. We want to run another test on Mac systems, right? So again, these tests will obviously be required to have multiple build activities, right? And that's why in order to save this, what we can do is in order to compile and save a bit on the workload, Jenkins can simply be divided into master and slave architectures. Whereas suppose the same application needs to be tested on 3 different environments, then we can have then we can assign the deployment on Windows to suppose first slave, deployment on Linux on second slave, and deployment on Mac on third slave, right? Because again, these slaves will be configured to provide that required environment, right? Again, then we can use it as a part of running multiple parallel testing, and multiple automation can be done parallelly as a part of this entire master and slave architecture, right? And whatever has been the report, they can be sent back to the master from the slave nodes as a part of master and slave architecture that we can follow on top of Jenkins here, right? And again, if we focus on the continuous delivery pipeline using Jenkins, here we can focus now. First of all, what we will be doing is, first of all, we can simply fetch the code from Git itself. Then we will try to compile it. Then we'll conduct multiple unit testing on top of it. Then we will package it, and then we can deploy it on top of any production servers out here, right? And that is exactly what we'll be doing as a part of our hands-on here, right? So we can now Jenkins is available for almost every platform out there. So we can go ahead and download Jenkins. So we can simply search for download Jenkins, and again, based on the environment which we are running, we can simply select the environment with the Mac, Windows, Linux, or any specific Ubuntu image. We can choose accordingly, and then we can simply click on installation. And depending upon the environment, the required installer will be downloaded, and then we can simply run it just like we install any other software. We can run the installer, and then we can get started, right? Now, once we are in the process of installing Jenkins here, we can choose multiple plugins that we're using frequently. Like we have, now at the time of installation itself, it will ask us to choose multiple commonly used plugins that we have Git, we have Selenium, that will be automatically installed, so that we don't have to worry about installing them manually once we have the entire Jenkins installed. All right. So we can see the entire link being generated and then being deployed here. All right, so once we have this one installed, Jenkins is now by default is installed in a local host. So if we have to access Jenkins here in the browser itself, we have to simply type in as localhost, and by default Jenkins is installed on localhost, then colon, then port number 8080, right? So now once we have the Jenkins installed here, we can simply go ahead and type in as localhost and port number 8080. And then we can use as username at time of installation. There we can specify the username that we have used. And then we can specify the password here. So let's enter the password that we have used. And now click on sign in. All right. So now this is the dashboard that we will be looking at. Now this is a dashboard that we will be looking at once we log into Jenkins, right? So here we can see the multiple. Here we can see multiple. Here we can see multiple development cycles. Now here we can see we have multiple dummy projects being listed here, right? And now if we want to get started here on now, let's see first of all how we can go ahead and clear and create our first project on Jenkins, right? Now for doing that, what we can do here, we can click on new item. Let's click on new item here. And then in new item here, we have to choose the type of project that we are trying to develop here or that we are trying to create here, right? So here we can choose, suppose here we can start by a freestyle. That means we can choose any kind of project. If we want to be specific for Mavens, we can choose Maven. If we want to design a pipeline here, then we can define the pipeline as well, depending upon the entire structure here. All right. For example, suppose let's say, well, now first of all, let's start with a freestyle here. So we can choose freestyle. Then we can define any name here for the project. For example, we want to call this as Edureka Oct, right? We can define the name here. And then once we scroll down, we can click on OK to get started. Now, let's say we start with a freestyle project here. We can scroll down, click on OK. Now here we can add a short description about the project. Suppose here we have a dummy project. Dummy project here. Now here we can choose, suppose let's say if this is a part of GitHub project, then we can specify the project URL that we'll be getting as a part of our GitHub URL itself, right? That we can specify here, or again we can choose what kind of project this is that we can use to get started, right? And now suppose let's say if you want, we can simply choose any of these, or we can keep it to blank as exactly as per a requirement, right? Now if we scroll down here, then we have source code management, right? That means now here we have to specify from where this entire project will be getting the code, right? So suppose if we have our own GitHub repository that we did create in our yesterday module, right? So we can specify that repository URL here. For example, if you want to refer to this, let's log in to the same GitHub repository that we did create yesterday. So we can go to GitHub, and then we can pinpoint to our repository that we have created. So yesterday we did create Edureka 111, right? Right. So now if we want to use this repository URL for fetching the code, right? We can simply copy the URL of this repository. We can come back to Jenkins, and in repository URL here, we can simply enter the URL here, right? We can simply enter the URL here, right? And again, if you want to focus on any of the credentials that we want to use here, we can simply use the credentials that will be used for this, for getting connected to this report through this remote URL, because we have seen the same thing. If you are trying to connect to the same instance using our own Git, we have to specify the password for the first time, right? So that it can validate and then can start fetching the code from this given repository, right? And again, it is not necessary that we have to add only a single repository. If you want to add more, we can keep on adding more repository one by one. We can do that. All right. Suppose we want to fetch the code from 2 repositories, then we can specify the link of 2 repositories, and then we can add it. For example, suppose let's say if we come back, not sure who that person was. All right. So now let's get right back. Suppose let's say we want to fetch the code from this repository as well. We can copy this. We can enter the repository URL. And again, we can specify the same the credentials for accessing this particular repository here. We can specify that, right? And then here we can specify from which branch we want to fetch the code here. Suppose let's say if we are creating this project only for bugs and fixes, right? And we have a separate branch for that, then we can specify the branch name as well. Suppose let's say here we have a separate branch by the name of suppose fix, right? Then we can specify the branch name as fix as well. Or we can keep it to master, which is the default branch name for everyone, right? We can do that. And now here, depending upon the URL here, now we can choose the repository browser. Suppose depending upon the URL that we have entered here, it can automatically fetch, or it can automatically detect the browser, or we can say GitHub repository, or it can automatically detect which kind of repository we are using here, whether it is a GitHub, whether it is a Bitbucket. So as you can see here, we have multiple repositories as a service being offered, right? So again, we can keep it to auto. So based on the URL, it will automatically detect what kind of repository is being added here. Now, and again, this is for Git. If we want to add a repository for Subversion, we can also specify that, or we can keep it to Git as it is. We can do that, right? And then once we are done, once we are done setting up the GitHub URL here, that means the repository URL, then we can simply trigger the build out of it, right? So here, if we want to build periodically, suppose let's say we want we know that the developers, they are continuously, they'll be updating, they'll be pushing, they'll be committing their code in the remote repository every day at 9 p.m. For example, now this is the actual use case, right? That's how it is. Suppose we know that the team here will be actually uploading the code or committing the code at specifically 9 p.m. daily on a daily basis, right? Then we can schedule the build. That means every day at 9, the build will be created out of the code that will be fetched from the GitHub repository here that we can create, that we can go ahead and create that. All right. And then we have the build environment. Here we can choose the build environment. That means under which build environment we want to use here, right? For example, suppose we want to build this with Ant, right? We want to build with some other projects, but for with Gradle here, right? We can choose accordingly, right? That means from which build environment will be used while building. And again, when we are focusing on build here, then we can choose, okay, what kind of process or what kind of step has to be executed at time of building, right? So suppose let's say we want to invoke and we want to invoke Gradle script here for the building purposes here. Then we can define the Gradle version. Suppose we want to choose a default version here. And then again, we can simply specify the build step. Suppose again, once we are done with invoking and, then suppose if we want to run with timeout or we want to execute a shell script, then we can specify here as a part of building, here. All right. And now, and as a last part, we have to specify the post build option. That means once the entire build has been done, once the entire code has been fetched, once the entire build has been done, then what should happen after the build? Then what should happen after the build here? Suppose let's say we want to send, we want Jenkins to send an email notification. That means now the entire build has been completed. So suppose if we want to send an email notification to us, we can simply specify the email here, and then we can get notifications on top of it. That means the entire build has been successfully completed, or even if it is failed, again an email will be sent out, right? I suppose let's say here we have on GitHub commit, or suppose again the commit is working done here, then we can have the email being sent here, right? Or suppose we want to build some other projects after as a part of pipeline, right? Suppose once this is done, then we want to build another project, right? Then we can specify the projects to build, and then we can and that will be triggered as soon as this is done. As soon as this is done, that particular project will be triggered here, right? So as you can see, suppose if we want to build multiple other projects, so here we can simply start typing in. Now, as we have multiple other projects already in place here, right? Suppose we want Edureka, suppose 999, this one to be executed, this one to be built post completion, post successful build of this one, right? So then we can specify this as a part of build other projects, as we can specify that. And then we can set the order as well. Suppose first of all, we want the email to be sent, and then it should work on building other projects, right? We can specify that. And once we are done, we can simply click on save. Once we are done, we can simply click on save here. And now we want to build this up here. We can simply click on, if we want, depending upon how we have scheduled the build, it will build accordingly. Or if we want to build it right now, then we can simply click on build now. And as you can see, the entire build is currently being executed. As you can see, the current build is currently being executed. And again, it may take a couple of seconds again to be completely built here, as you can see here. All right. And again, if we wish to see the entire console output, how this was completed, here we can see the entire step that was again being executed as a part of the entire project here, right? And here we can see the entire build information, again how it was completely built here. Again, we can see the complete output, and again if there are any changes being done, again we can see the changes as well, right? Now as you can see here, now we had enabled the execution of Edureka 999 as well after post completion of the successful build of this project, right? But again, since the repository for that particular, suppose there is an error here for this particular project here, right? And since there's a specific error here, that's why it is not successfully completed, right? But again, this was triggered as per the logic that we have specified there, right? So again, if you want to revisit this part here, let's do that. Let's revisit. So here again, we can click on new item here. Suppose we are focusing on pipeline. Again, we can define the pipeline as suppose oct pipeline. We can define the pipeline here as oct pipeline. Again, we can scroll down, click on OK. Now, when we are working with pipeline here, again, we can write a short description. Suppose pipeline for dummy project. So here we can define the entire pipeline here. Again, in terms of build trigger, like how we want to trigger the build, we want to build periodically, or again, once we want to build this after other projects has been built successfully, then we can specify that, right? Or we want now, and now as a pipeline, what we have to do is we have to simply define the entire pipeline using the Groovy script, right? Using the Groovy script here, right? And again, if you want to be specific here, right? Again, then we can simply suppose, let's say, as a part of a hands-on here, let's focus on using a sample GitHub plus Maven pipeline, right? So here we have to define multiple stages when we are working with pipeline here. Here we have to define multiple stages, right? Stage one, first of all, as preparation, that means for display for fetching the code from the Git itself. So as you can see here we have the code being specified here. Let me zoom this in. So here we have the entire code specified from Git here, right? And then we have to specify the URL here for our own repository. For example, suppose let's say we give the URL to our own repository here. That is this one. Here we can replace it with our own repository URL here, right? And then here how that entire package has to be created based on the file that we have in that repository here, right? That we have to define as a part of stage under build, right? And then we can define whatever we need to be built here as a part of the building phase, as a part of the building stage here. And then once we are done specifying the building stage, then we can define the results. I mean, how the results has to be specified here. And then we have discussed the JUnit, right? All right. And then we had discussed that JUnit is basically used for generating the HTML. Now we have simply used the JUnit, right, as a part of generating HTML reports here, right? And now once we are done, we can simply click on save. And now if we again want to build it, again we can simply click on build now. And as you can see now, the build has been scheduled because again we have simply chosen the schedule here. So as you can see here we have the entire stages being prepared here, right? So whatever the URL that we have specified here, depending upon the configuration, the entire project will be built or it will be executed exactly as per our requirement. We can do that, right? Because again, building will also be building also has to be configured based on the project, based on the code that we have fetched here, right? So this is basically focused on the Java project here, but again here we have the HTML components here that cannot be built using the Maven component here, right? So that's how we can get started by defining the entire pipeline using Jenkins. And once we start our detailed course, our detailed module inside our certification, then we'll be focusing on how we can actually create the projects, how we can deploy it on top of using Jenkins, and how we can create the entire pipeline, starting from fetching the code from the GitHub repository, and how to create the build, and how to create separate build for different use cases, and then how we can get started on deploying it on running multiple testing scripts on top of it as well. All of that can be defined as a part of pipeline here. Thank you so much for joining, guys, and have a great day ahead. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.